Hello, thank you so much. I'm going to be talking about Schneider Electric's supply chain security program. And if you're not sure what supply chain security, I'll talk about that in just a moment. So please raise your hand if you have one cell phone. All right? Raise your hand if you have two cell phones. All right, that's a lot of us in here. So this is a picture of inside of the Apple factory. And I wanted to highlight it because we're talking about supply chain, but not just about hardware, which you normally can think about for supply chain, but also software. So in a typical supply chain, you have the hardware components, but in a cell phone, like the Apple iPhone, there are 50 pre-installed applications. You've got the operating system and 49 applications. In addition to that, you have the hardware, the chip, the system on chip. So in these 50 pre-installed applications, do you have the software bill of materials? When you open up that box, do you know what's on those applications? There are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of developers who have written code for that applications. And what about the hardware that was put into it? Do you have the hardware bill of materials, also known as SBOMs? So you're using this in your business every day. Every day, you are making decisions about how you are executing your work, you're doing things, and yet you're running a device right there that you know nothing about. So let's talk about just a general supply chain and the ecosystem of that supply chain. So you got a cookie, right? You've got cows, chickens, you got eggs, you got butter, flour. So all of those are suppliers. And then you have the baker. So baker, think of it like an original equipment manufacturer, an OEM, okay? So do you know where the baker is getting that butter? Or those chickens, and how many, and did they come from 15 different, sources and farms and things like that? No, because you don't have that visibility. So you don't know what they're doing in their production and how they're building it or creating it as part of that. And that's why I'm talking about supply chain. Because at Schneider Electric, we have 52,000 suppliers. 52,000 is a very large number. Not all of them are providing us information and components, let's say hardware or software, that goes into our product. That's about 2,000 suppliers, just direct suppliers, what we call our tier 1 suppliers. 2,000 of them that we work with every day to build the 15,000 intelligent products that we deliver to everyone. So with these supply chains, I'm going to talk about one product. This is a product that's a data center universal power supply, a UPS. And we worked with Exeger, which is a company that does third-party supplier management and risk management. And we gave them our HBOM and SBOM for this product. And they identified, we had almost 40 tier 1 suppliers. It became 500 entities, which means that upstream, there were 500, it could be people, organizations, distributors, supply chains, moving things, around the world as part of just one product. And that could include the open source developer who is, creating code, but being able to see all of those dependencies and those upstream suppliers can be pretty daunting. And so part of what I'm going to talk about is what we do from a supply chain security program, but also some of the struggles and issues, because you can't multiply 15,000 intelligent products by 500 suppliers, right? You can't scale that at all. So what are we doing with our suppliers as part of this? So you don't need to, this is just a slide to show you the life cycle. There's a life cycle as we're putting together products, and I'm going to show you the details, but just across the bottom, it is simply, R&D, manufacturing. If we're doing software, it just could be a distribution channel. And then I'm going to talk about the transversal up at the top. What are we doing across the entire life cycle? So Inside of research, development, and design, or design and development, you see these hexagons here. And I'm going to talk about these different hexagons. But I want to explain that supply chain security has a significant overlap for product security. And I'm in the cybersecurity and product security office. And this overlap with product security is because we are a supplier, obviously, right? So we are part of that supply chain. And so all of these things that I'm going to be talking about are things that we would expect in the future for other suppliers to also have this. So first I'm going to talk about this product and system security real briefly. We follow the ISA IEC 62443 series of standards that were designed for industrial control systems. And we have these standards mandated for our products that are under development. And then we actually have the highest level of maturity for our 4-1. That's one piece of the standard for secure development. And this teams all around the world, they follow this standard. It's part of their DNA now, but it wasn't always. It's very difficult to really bring that into the culture, to embed it into frameworks, to embed it into what they're doing every day. So the struggles could be, how do you make sure that 12,000 people in R&D have the appropriate training? Because just taking webinars and things like that can get a bit boring. So we do also capture the flag. We, in fact, used some of that capture the flag for last year's S4 conference as part of the Capture the Flag event, because we found that we needed to develop specific OT challenges that were specific to our customers. And another challenge with all of this is that the developers change, right? That there's always evolving. So this is a significant area that we have to spend a lot of time on, and there is pushback because it competes when you're doing training with the need to deliver the products. Because you don't see on a data sheet, I took training. You see on the data sheet that the features of the product are this, this, and this. So this is one of the challenges that we have and a lot of other suppliers have. And our technology validation, what we're doing specifically in the secure testing. We have had a global security lab for a long time. They are CREST accredited. They have, the pen testers have all these certifications. But we've spent a lot of time over the most recent years shifting that capability for secure testing into the hands of the development teams. And it requires training and involvement, because development teams, even if they're following secure development practices, they're not really doing secure testing at the level of a pen tester, right? But why can't they? They have tools and technologies, so they need to be trained on that. So this is a shift that we are doing. Again, it's a significant investment. There's no pushback on that. The testers really, really want to learn this capability. So it's been a really interesting project as we've done that. So I'm going to talk super quick about SBOMs. This is my main initiative along with supply chain security. So software bill of materials, being able to provide them to our customers. If you want to know more about that, tomorrow in the Schneider Electric Prime Room at 10 a.m., I will be talking more about our SBOM program and how we deliver those SBOMs. And also you can see a couple and look at it from a customer perspective. But transparency is very important to us. SBOMs are not perfect. A lot of them, especially in the OT ICS world, we generate them off scanning tools. And those are not completely accurate, to be honest. And so our development teams have to evaluate the different components that the scanning tool has found to see whether or not that's truth. They have the component list, but we're building into what we call the development pipelines the ability to create those software bill of materials at that time. But OCS products, you don't go through probably a bi-weekly or a weekly product update. And really creating those and adding those to the pipelines takes some time. So that's one of the items where we're scaling it still. We have thousands of SBOMs, but being able to make it efficient for our development teams and getting it into that real process for building the products is taking us time. So this is the piece that I don't see a lot of other suppliers have. I talk every day with our suppliers. I work on the cybersecurity agreements. I created the team that does these assessments, that evaluates the evidence. And suppliers, they look at their R&D as a self-contained unit. It's no different probably anywhere else in the world. I'm a developer by background. And the R&D environments are very hard, and you don't want to use the same IT controls that you do for the finance department. But yet, especially in our OT environments, we have labs. How are we securing and keeping those labs separate so they can do the work for those labs and be able to simulate customer environments, whereas we need to defend against any external attacks? And that takes a lot of conversation, to put it politely, between the enterprise IT teams and also this R&D. And that can be a struggle. When you are trying to discuss, well, we need to keep this closed, or we need to put up this firewall, but that's not yet what the lab environment really needs. It needs to be able to simulate that. I mean, it can take weeks and sometimes months to really get to an architecture agreement of how we can secure these environments. And not only that, but the developer workstations, right? You've got virtual machines, you've got virtual private clouds and everything, and developers have the ability to be able to even install and build their own, systems from scratch. So we have a set of controls that we take these teams through that shows, these are the controls that we need. We'll work with you so that you can manage those controls, but it is a difficult and arduous process, especially when you have 100 development locations like we do. And speaking of controls, I really want to highlight our source code governance. What that means is that we classify the code, which says some code is unrestricted, right? Because we're using open source. But a lot of what we build, as you all know, goes into critical infrastructure. And what that means is that we want to make sure it doesn't leave our domain, doesn't leave the environment. And by not having those controls in place, then each team was responsible for their own decisions about how they were going to secure that environment. So we created this policy and these set of controls that we monitor and work with these teams on to say, if you've got a code repository that has this information in here, then you must do this, or you need to comply in our own more enterprise repository. Because we acquire companies, and they will have existing repositories. So this is a key thing. So when you're talking with your different suppliers, ask them, what are you doing for the source code? How are you securing that? Now I want to take a moment to talk about the next step. So we've designed, we've created it, and we've got, let's say, firmware ready. And this firmware is going to go somewhere. So just think about what is the integrity of that firmware as it passes into these other environments. Or software applications, when it goes to additional sites and distribution locations. Think about that for a minute. And I'm going to talk about the industrial activities for cybersecurity. So again, you don't need to know the details of this specific chart, but what I'm going to tell you is that manufacturers have, as most of you know from an OT area, is that the OT systems may not be able to and do not comply to the IT controls. But yet we're seeing that digital relationship happening between IT systems and the OT systems. And how do we secure those environments? So we have an entire program specifically on industrial activity cybersecurity. And that means several different things. First off, we have now cybersecurity site leaders at those 100+ manufacturing and distribution centers. And the reason we have that is if something happens in that location, who are we going to call? We want to know who's accountable for validating the compliance for those IT and OT controls. They may not be OT and specific experts to the level that we have at the conference today, but they are somebody, and they have a group that works with them to train them up and to upskill them. And part of that also is that they are now responsible for any new product lines that they must be following the IEC 62443 standards. So again, ask your suppliers. It's an odd question. I still haven't received a request on that. Is this product being created on an IEC 62443 line, right? It's new, you know, it's rare that people are going to that level yet, but that's where we need to go to as an industry. And that is taking a lot of time. There's investment. That means industrial engineers, when they're working with development, have to figure out how do we make this secure. I talked about the integrity of that firmware and the processes. How do you make sure there's no compromise as it goes through? And that's a lot of work. And that's really not, you know, let's say the general knowledge that's currently in manufacturing plants today, that cybersecurity, how do you build this in and make sure it goes through the process without any challenge? And then a lot of our products go to, whether it be an integrator, and if we are doing projects, then we have staging centers and locations where a customer can come in, but yet they're shipped somewhere, right? So that chain of custody we see in contracts doesn't always talk about integrity of the product, just like who had it. Well, they had it, but is the integrity maintained through that? So having those controls in place, and this is actually, you know, I want to thank one of our customers because about 5 or 6 years ago, they came to us and gave us a poor rating because we did not have the appropriate level of controls throughout this process. And we very quickly shifted, enacted this program, and received an exceptional and made it as part of our centers of excellence. So you should be asking these same kind of questions of your integrators, of who's coming in the door. Do you have these kind of controls? We see it now in project requirement documents, and I encourage you to keep adding those level of controls and evaluation as you're receiving those products. Now this last piece here, I want to talk about it. It's, again, unique, the cyber badge. So we have field service folks, and we have people who remote in to products, and we also have a sales force that can go out and solution engineers, and these customer-facing individuals are now required to have a cyber badge. And to get that cyber badge, not only do they go through training, but we also make sure their laptops are compliant and their endpoints are compliant and that they understand. So this training is very specific to some of their roles. So for example, a lot of field service folks need to use USB keys to upgrade the firmware on the products, right? We don't want them buying USB keys off Amazon, right? They need to use the corporate, you know, approved devices, but also, you know, there's security checks that are done. So all of this is really important from a field service area. And as part of this, if they are not compliant, their badge is revoked if they had one, or they don't get a badge, and they can't go to the customer site. They can't work with customers. And this is a controversial program. I mean, it's when you've got somebody that let's say their badge is revoked and they have a customer visit the next day, you know, there's a lot of work that has to be done to go do this. So it is, let's just say it's always evolving, plus because the threats are evolving, but really it is so important, right? Going into the hands. So again, if you have suppliers, service personnel, anybody come into your sites, start asking them what questions they're doing that's on top of it. You can't just depend on a corporate program that checks on phishing. So this transversal that I'm going to talk about for a moment, I've talked about supply chain digital policies. I've showed you our source code governance policy, our customer requirements about how we changed our project security pipeline and how we do all of our projects. And we've got a detailed vulnerability management program. I'm not going to go into it, but you can go to the se.com website. We have our security advisories, but we also have our security advisories that are machine readable. And we have an extensive amount of work that we do with certs around the world. And then our cyber defense and incident response. We're working with customers. We're working internally. We work with our products. We do simulations. There's a lot of work that goes into this. But I want to talk about the third-party cybersecurity because I'm talking supply chain security, and I talked all about our practices that we have in place. Now, what am I doing with those 2,000 suppliers? As I mentioned about the assessments. So if I have a supplier, especially a new supplier, but then we've also prioritized our suppliers that go specifically into our products. So I may have a supplier that is not a lot of spend, right? I don't have to spend a lot of budget, but yet they're in 50 of my products, then they're a critical supplier, right? If something happens to them, if they have a vulnerability, or if there's something like that, I need to know who they are. So we first have a product security assessment process where we do evidence-based. I can tell you right now that first off, nobody wants to give evidence of their processes because it's like being graded by a teacher, right? And we do give gradings on the different areas that we evaluate. But I use this as a tool specifically to help uplift the other suppliers, right? And if they've got good processes, I make sure we take those and discuss them as like, how can we do this? And so the suppliers will generally go, well, I have this and I have this, and we say, okay, let's see the evidence. So we spend a lot of time coaching. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, Software Supply Chain Security, because I was sending them all these links and we were helping them so much. I'm like, oh, there's so much more. You need to secure your development environments and everything, like this. And I needed to give them something that's easier to say, this is what to do. So these suppliers are critical. And for critical suppliers, we create what's called these cyber leader dialogues, CISO Connects, whatever you want to call it, where I have the information for our product security suppliers that we list critical. So if something happens, I don't have to wait for them to acknowledge that event on a supplier site. I can go directly to them. And we do the same thing. We have these relationships with our customers. And that's really important in the supply chain security because you're not going to have complete visibility. Ever. I'm just going to tell you, it's never going to be there. And if you have that data, finding that data when you need it is going to be difficult to find. So having those key relationships in place is extremely important, and it takes time. I mean, we're not through the 2,000 that rate from critical to low. It's a long process. And if there's not a cyber agreement where they have to give me software bill of materials, especially for compiled DLL, I don't have the Microsoft DLL SBOMs yet. I keep pushing, and I will eventually get those. But that's going to take time for the industry to grow and mature. And so in conclusion, I just want to talk about when you are, as everybody here is a consumer, everybody, right? Please challenge your suppliers, challenge me, challenge our teams. What can we do to improve? What can we do for transparency, for visibility, for improvement of it? It's not going to solve every problem. It's not going to be a perfect A. There's no grading on the curve or anything like that. But if we don't do the homework and the work and the hard work to be able to give this information, to be able to improve our processes, it's going to get worse. And so as you are working with these suppliers, or if you are suppliers, we give this information, I do this talk, because I want others to ask questions, to think about what they're doing, and to not be afraid of not being perfect. So thank you so much for having me today. Have a good afternoon.